Good evening, welcome to what will be the last in the present series of Scotland at 7 for 2020. And of course, joining me in the studio tonight is my co-host, Kenny McBride. Welcome back, Kenny. It's nice to be back in the studio together again.
It is, yes, to look back at the rest of the year. It's been quite a year.
It certainly has, Kenny. And I think in the previous episode that we did of this retrospective, we looked at the year up till July. Mm-hmm. So I thought we'd have a look back at the high points and the low points starting from August. Mm-hmm. And of course, the biggest story, I think, in July, so I'll come to August in a minute, was coming out of lockdown.
Yeah.
And have we really, do you think, just taken our freedoms for granted until that point?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of strange to look back and think how well we seem to be doing over the summer. We were down, especially in Scotland, we had quite a long period with no deaths. We had very few cases. We did seem to be getting on top of things.
Yeah.
And it did seem like maybe we could start to ease up those restrictions. But obviously, in retrospect, some of those restrictions maybe could have stayed in place a wee bit longer. It's hard to say. Obviously, you're making decisions, or rather the government is making decisions day to day based on a lot of different factors. It's a tough one, but yeah, when we look back at those numbers, it is just heartbreaking to think how close we were to eradicating or eliminating the virus in Britain.
Yeah, we certainly,
especially in Scotland.
I think a lot of people felt that we had turned a corner. That as you say, we had got on top of it, and that we could relax the restrictions. Now it seems that we were a bit previous.
Possibly, yeah. But then again, as I say, the government obviously wanted to try and get the economy moving again. There's a lot of damage done to people by being stuck at home, not being able to work. A lot of problems with the NHS, people not being able to get surgeries and other kinds of treatment because the NHS was working at limited capacity. So yeah, it's been a really difficult year for politicians everywhere. And I think especially in Scotland, where obviously the financial powers aren't there to make all the decisions that they might want to make, and also no control over our own borders.
Well, of course, in Scotland, we had a call at certainly one point for control over the borders being made, and of course, it didn't happen. We didn't see that happening. But also on the back of your comments, Kenny, about how many people suffered from not being able to work. There was, of course, this huge demographic, the so-called gig economy, who've now been termed freelancers, people who work for themselves, who work in the creative industries, and were getting nothing, really. And of course, in Scotland, there was a call for support for freelancers.
Yeah.
But did it ever arrive?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that Alison Thulis particularly has been talking about all year. She's been on the show several times, kind of raising this issue. She's been raising it in Parliament when she's been there. And yeah, it just seems like it was a bit of a blind spot for the British government. All these people who, particularly as you said, in the creative industry, we talked to some actors as well recently. And it's heartbreaking for them. Their whole industry has been shut down. We have no idea when theatres are going to be able to reopen properly. And yeah, all these people who rely on these contract work have been left behind. There wasn't any formal support put in place. Same goes for people who were newly self-employed, people who had set up businesses at the start of the year. Didn't have sort of previous year's profits to report and thus get some sort of support. It's been really difficult for anybody who wasn't in just a normal paid job.
Yeah, or someone who'd been in business for some time. Yeah. But also we've heard recently, in fact just in the last few days, that the creative industries and people in those industries are not going to be able to move freely after Brexit, because they will require special permissions to travel from Europe to Scotland and vice versa, and that's putting at risk things like future Edinburgh festivals, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff we need to talk about Brexit over the second half of the year, but yeah, I mean, I've got friends who are in bands, and they would occasionally just say, "I'm going to go off and just go and stay with friends that I know in France, Germany, wherever." and play in the folk clubs or wherever.
Yeah.
They could go almost pretty much freely. They could just sling their guitar on their back and jump on a train and be in Paris in a matter of hours. And that's not open to them anymore. And also, we're not able to, we in theory, we're able to have people come back here. But again, they need visas. And the UK government is seemingly wanting to close off those routes. It's heartbreaking. And I think as you say, for things like the Edinburgh Festival, it's going to be incredibly difficult for organisers to get things going. It'd be easier for the actual international festival, but for things like the Fringe, people used to be able to come over on a tourist visa,
pretty much,
and just perform. It was a kind of special exception that was made, and it doesn't seem like the UK government's interested in that just now. And of course, August, we're about to talk about, is the first time we've not had an Edinburgh Festival, and since it started, it's all that loss of culture, I think.
And all,
is one of the real heartbreaking things.
Also, the major events, Kenny, the big concert venues like the Hydro Arena, for example, now can't fill it with people anymore. So the kind of, we know that the musicians, particularly nowadays, make their money from live performances because the internet has made music so easily available and so cheap that the Performing Rights Society has difficulty in collecting the money for the artist. So now, how are they going to make any money?
Yeah, I know a lot of bands who are really struggling. They've had to start their own kind of Patreons and things, trying to find other ways to make money. Yeah. But it's a really, really difficult thing, and it's as we've said with just about everything to do with Brexit, having it on top of COVID has just been a nightmare for so many people.
Because the other thing that happened in July was the announcement of the so-called power grab, the Internal Markets Bill announced by the UK government, and how it is going to affect the running of Scotland going forward from its final adoption, which it has, of course, now been passed into law. But at the time, we were still on that route towards it being a bill and then being discussed. It seemed to be railroaded through fairly quickly, but what do you think, Kenny? What is the result of this power grab going to be in terms of the control that the Scottish government and the Scottish Parliament can exert over the day-to-day running of the country? Yeah,
well, we talked to Michael Russell about this a few times, and virtually everybody that we've had on over the course of the year has had some comment on it, and none of it's been positive. I think there's an element of it which is purely political from the Tories. It would have been possible to negotiate these things, to have a four nations approach, if you like, where the four governments would get together and decide an agreed framework on how things were going to go forward. The way that the EU did, for example, where all the governments would get together and figure out what they wanted to do together. But the UK government wants to take back control, and that's been the goal. And I think particularly in Scotland, what we're likely to see is the UK government spending, and that's good in some ways, but it will be, look at what the UK government did for you. Look at what the British government did for you, and the Scottish government didn't do. I expect that a lot of these projects will have Union flags stuck all over them to remind you that this was the UK government and the Scottish government had nothing to do with this extra money coming to you. I think they started that with the city deals. I think that was always intended to be the UK government kind of exerting its authority, because that's what it's all about. They don't really believe that the Scottish government should have any power and shouldn't be able to take a different path from the UK government. And I think as much as possible, I expect them to use it to undermine the Scottish government, and to a lesser extent, I think the Welsh government and the Northern Irish government. Of course, many people, Kenny, particularly in the pro-independence movement or community, if you want to call it that, have been predicting this for a long time, ever since it emerged way back before the Brexit bill was announced, even, or before there was any thought about it. The building of this new hub
building in Edinburgh, and the enticing of civil servants away from the Scottish Parliament and into this new building, that this was always part of the long-term plan of the United Kingdom, that they were going to put in place a centre of power in Edinburgh, which would be able to usurp the Scottish Parliament. Do you think the United Kingdom has always had this long-term aim of ending devolution? The Tories have always wanted to do this, and now this is it coming to fruition.
I don't know if ending devolution is what they want. I think there's definitely a desire to neuter it. So at least in Scotland, it would be harder to do so, obviously, in the north of Ireland because of the Good Friday Agreement. The Welsh government are less troublesome. The Labour Party have still got a pretty strong grasp on power in Wales, and they're not leaning towards independence anytime soon, I don't think. But in Scotland, yeah, that big new building that they've got, that the Scotland office has built in Edinburgh, I think it's designed to be an alternative power base. I think we've heard just in the news this week that they've spent massively more on staffing for the Scotland office. They're spending massively more on communications as well, which effectively means propaganda. You see them in tweets and on Facebook all the time saying, look at what the UK government has done. And all it is, well, you gave us Barnett consequentials, which you have to do because that's how the funding settlement works for Britain. So yeah, I think there is definitely an aim to establish that different power base.
So you think that the power grab really is giving the United Kingdom control over at least a big chunk of the Barnett consequentials, the money which would naturally flow to the Scottish Parliament normally, as a percentage of the overall spending in the United Kingdom. They're wanting to control a sizable chunk of that directly from London.
I don't know if they want to control that money directly. I think that would be quite difficult to do politically. But I think they just want to be visible. I think, as I said, they want to have a Union flag visible wherever they can put it. Whether it's on a new bridge or a new motorway or whatever kind of project, they want people going, well, we wouldn't have got that if it wasn't for good old Boris and Alistair Jack standing up for Scotland down south. I think that's the real goal. I don't necessarily think it's to take money away from the Scottish Parliament. It's just to wave the flag and say, look at what the UK government is still doing in Scotland.
So it's really a way of inserting, shall we say, inducements for people to support the Union by demonstrating what they can do, even though the Scottish Parliament cannot do anything about it.
Inducement is one way of describing it. Bribery is another. But yeah I think that's very much the goal, yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us up to August this year. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of the biggest stories in August, at the beginning of August, was the COVID outbreak in Aberdeen, which caused panic because having had, as we said earlier in the programme, this light at the end of the tunnel where we thought the worst was over, to suddenly see the disease breaking out again in a city like Aberdeen. And also discovering that it was due, in part at least, to the relaxation of the rules regarding
hospitality,
pubs and restaurants.
Yeah, I think, in retrospect, it looks like such a minor issue. It was actually a very small handful of cases, and I think it was right for the Scottish Government to try and clamp down on it. But I know, I have a lot of friends in Aberdeen. I went to university there, and I know there was a lot of anger there. Both some people being angry at the Scottish Government for maybe overreacting as they saw it, and other people who were furious at the pubs who had kind of were given an inch and took a mile. Kind of were too loose. We're allowing too many people to be in enclosed spaces. I think it's, as I say, looking back at it now, it seems almost trivial compared to where we've got to now. But yeah, at the time, I think it was right to try and clamp down on it. But as we've seen, once the virus gets a chance, once it gets a foothold, it becomes very, very difficult to clamp back down on it without.
It's
without
easy
really
for
heavy
it to spread quickly, but much
Yeah.
harder to slow it down once it gets some momentum.
Exactly.
Now, there are a number of other things which happened, of course, in August, and one of the ones which stands out in my mind was the enormous explosion in Beirut Harbour. And that got people talking a lot, not just about the fact that basically explosive fertilizer was stored next to fireworks, but it was the fact that a conventional blast of that size could do so much damage to a city. It sparked a lot of arguments, again, about the storing of nuclear weapons so close to one of Scotland's major cities. Do you think it had an effect on people in terms of thinking again about nuclear weapons? Did it spark the debate again?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, it obviously had an effect on Beirut. Lebanon has been, having a lot of political turmoil before the pandemic even started. And this sparked even more anger at the government. There were people who had said, this is not safe, we need to do something about this. And it had been ignored. Obviously, the rebuilding effort is going to take a long time. There was loss of life. And it is a tragedy of quite substantial proportions. But yes, as you say, it does remind you of how dangerous lots of things can be. We have to think about how we store things. And as you say, this was conventional explosives. It doesn't leave any fallout, and it still managed to leave this gigantic crater. And when you think about how close we are to a base of gigantic nuclear arsenal that could leave a crater 10 times that size.
There was also, I think, at that time, concern building about EDF Energy and their plan to restart the Hunterston nuclear power station, Hunterston B, with 375 cracks in the reactor core. And they actually seem to have persuaded the Atomic Energy Authority to increase the number of permitted cracks just so that they could start this reactor up again. And yet, we have obviously things like Chernobyl to think back on, and Fukushima in Japan, which of course was submerged under a tidal wave. But to restart a cracked reactor, which they know is a risky thing to do, particularly with a gas-cooled reactor which relies on gas flowing through these carbon bricks, to have them blocking up with debris seemed to be a risk that needn't be taken when particularly Scotland didn't need the energy. Yeah,
I mean, I go swing both ways on nuclear power. The waste obviously is a real problem, and as you say, these older reactors are dangerous. But on the other hand, nuclear power can produce an awful lot of energy without any carbon emissions.
It's in the short term.
It is a balancing act. On the whole, as you say, though, Scotland, with the amount of wind we have, the amount of wave power we have, the amount of tidal power we have, there is no reason that I can see to have nuclear power in Scotland.
The justification, as I remember it, Kenny, was that the power was being exported to the north of England where they needed it. And so it wasn't even really going to benefit the people of Scotland to switch this reactor back on.
Yeah, well, of course, if England needs power, then maybe England should be looking at its own resources. Scotland, as we've said, there were a couple of times this year when we produced more from wind than we could consume.
I think it's still growing as well. And
we're producing lots of energy on the islands that we can't use because it's we don't have the interconnectors to the grid. These things are all problems that unfortunately the Scottish government can do very little about because it doesn't have the powers over energy production. That's something that we can only solve by a whole other method.
Okay. And one of the other international stories that we featured a lot of was Joe Biden's candidacy for the presidency. But when he named his running mate as Kamala Harris, that changed the dynamic. It has changed the dynamic of American politics. A black woman, a woman of colour, in a position of power as vice president. That's not happened before. Do you think that Mr. Biden is going to be a force for good in terms of race relations in the United States and further afield?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I followed the primaries very, very closely, and Joe Biden sold himself as this great friend to black people. And that's largely because he was Barack Obama's vice president. Mm-hmm. But what we kind of forget is that he was appointed to be Barack Obama's vice president because he was the old white guy that would make people think that the young black guy was okay. He was not known as somebody who was a great friend to black people before he was Barack Obama's vice president. But, and this is something that some of my African American friends told me, is you don't understand the symbolism of somebody who was willing to be second to a black man.
Yeah.
The fact that this old white guy was willing to take leadership from a young black man was very, very powerful. And a lot of black people saw that and said, well, we can trust Joe. Joe is willing to take leadership from black people. And that had a huge influence. With Kamala Harris, I mean, she's not my favorite politician. Her policies are not necessarily what I would agree with. But I think symbolically it is enormous for women especially. But then again, especially for young black women, to see that the doors aren't closed. That there are very, very few black women in American politics. I think she's only the second black woman ever elected to the Senate, which seems tragic. And we have very similar problems in this country. The proportion of non-white women in politics and non-white men, come to that, is far too small. But yeah, I think Kamala Harris as a symbol will be very, very powerful, and I think will hopefully help to build some sort of harmony back into America.
Okay. Well, August, there were a number of, I suppose you might call them disasters in August. There was, of course, the fact that there was a train crash outside of Stonehaven caused by storm debris, which had fallen onto the tracks. Now, these are obviously a very unusual events in Scottish railways to have such a serious accident because a train driver actually took the correct action in reversing his train back to the station because he knew there had been a landslide in front of him. Only then to have another landslide happen to the rear of his train is colossal bad luck. Do you think, I mean, talking about railways, the railway in Scotland is a strange amalgamation of both public and private partnership, isn't it? I mean, officially, the Scottish railway network is publicly owned, but it's being run by, or it was being run by, a Dutch firm, who I understand have had the contract taken away from them now.
Yeah, well, ScotRail obviously is a Dutch nationalised company. But running as a private enterprise in Scotland, and then Railtrack is a kind of
British kind of.
It's not quite public, but not wholly private. It's one of these kind of arm's length type organisations. I think we can look back, and there's very few people who think that the way that railways were privatised in Britain was a good idea.
Would you be in favour, Kenny? Do you think of bringing the railways back into full private ownership if Scotland becomes independent?
I think, well, I don't think we should wait till we're independent. The power is there now to bring the railways back into, or at least to bring the franchise back into public ownership. Obviously, the rail track isn't available yet. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those really extraordinary things. There's been lots of polling on this, and even a majority of Tory voters support public ownership of the railways.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a natural monopoly. It's very, very hard to have meaningful competition on the railways. We've seen that every time a franchise has been taken into special measures, kind of been put into public control, it's been more efficient, has delivered a better service.
I think the East Coast Main Line was one of the few franchises that ever made a profit, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was when it was in public ownership
that it ran.
These things are and as I say, a majority of Tory voters, who you would think would be the most supportive of privatisation, want it nationalised, and yet there isn't a party offering it. The SNP is the closest. The SNP is talking about a public option for the next round of franchising in Scotland, and theoretically could interrupt that Abellio franchise. But neither Labour nor the Tories are willing to consider it, and I just don't understand it.
It doesn't seem the kind of issue that would be a poison chalice to a party.
No, there's a huge majority of support amongst the public. As I say, when a majority of Tory voters want something nationalised, then there really ought to be somebody fighting for nationalisation. But in the UK, that's just not on the table.
Okay. Well, listen, we're moving into September now. And of course, the biggest news really for Scotland was the referendum bill being brought forward by March, or it originally was meant to be earlier, I think, but because of COVID-19, it was set back. How important is this going to be to have a referendum bill? We know that we've got a general referendums bill, which allows the Scottish Government to hold referendums. Yeah. But as I understand it, they also have to have a second bill on the specifics of an independence referendum. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was all part of the programme for government that was announced in September. There was this promise of a referendums bill, or a referendum bill specifically, kind of setting a date and setting the question and whatnot by March. It's going to be interesting to see if that does still happen. Obviously, the Scottish Government has committed to it, and I certainly hope that they will stick to that. But with COVID still kind of hanging around, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them not to do it. Obviously, the Tories and Labour and the Lib Dems are going to fight it tooth and nail. There's almost certainly going to be a legal challenge. There is obviously the question of whether the Scottish Parliament has the power to do it. So that's going to have to be decided probably in the courts.
Of course, I think later this month, Martin Keating's publicly funded court action to get a ruling on this from the Scottish law lords. It's coming up, I think it's the 29th of this month, I believe. But many people are saying it's probably likely to drag on well into the year. It may not come to any conclusions.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see what does happen with that. If that bill is introduced, then there's an argument, obviously, right now that the point is moot because there isn't a bill on the table, and that would be really unfortunate for Martin himself. He's put a lot of effort into this, and if it turns out that the courts say, well, we can't decide on this because there isn't anything specific to decide on, that would be disappointing for him. I think we just have to wait and see. The Scottish Government, obviously, they have the public support now for another referendum. People want independence. So I guess we just have to wait and see. Certainly, that programme for government, there was a very strong commitment. And now, as I say, with the majority support, there doesn't seem to be anything politically standing in their way. It just seems to be legal obstacles, and obviously whether it seems appropriate to do it while COVID is still hanging over our heads.
Okay. One of the other big issues in September was the assertion that the Brexit bill that was written by the UK government was going to break international laws. Now, this seems... it just, as you were saying earlier on, it seems so unimportant now, but at the time, it was widely believed that the British government was going to break international law with this bill, and that it was going to trample over the Good Friday Agreement, and also, to a large extent, the devolution settlement in Scotland. And yet, we now, at the end of this year, and we'll come back to this in a moment, have a Brexit deal now agreed. And the whole issue of the law breaking just seems to have evaporated. Has it been forgotten? Has the European Union, do you think, just let it slide?
Well, there's a number of things there. The biggest problem was how it affected the Northern Ireland settlement, the Good Friday Agreement. That does seem to have been resolved, and the UK government did tweak the bill to make it acceptable. But I think that was one of the biggest examples of how much Boris Johnson's government just doesn't seem to care about international opinion anymore. We saw Joe Biden, for example, saying, this is not acceptable. We are not going to do a trade deal with a country that messes with Ireland. Joe Biden himself is one of these Americans who thinks he's Irish, and he was very, very vocal about this. Obviously, the Irish government was furious. We're still surprisingly diplomatic about it. Leo Varadkar knows how to play the diplomatic game.
Yeah.
But at that time, I think the EU was looking at the UK and saying, we just don't know how to trust you anymore. We can't work with people who won't keep their international agreements. And yeah, I think it's extraordinary. We saw law officers resign because they couldn't put their names to something that was going to break the law. And then other law officers were appointed who, it was almost like mob lawyers, people who would just turn a blind eye to when you were breaking the law.
I was just going to say, we now know that there was a parallel series of negotiations going on in the background over specifically Northern Ireland and its border with the European Union and the Republic in the south. But that was kept very quiet until very recently. We in the mainland of the UK heard almost nothing about it until very recently.
Yeah, well, I think that's a symptom of how little care has been given to Northern Ireland throughout the whole Brexit process. I mean, how many times did we hear Northern Ireland mentioned during the Brexit campaign in 2016?
Oh yes, and they were never going to create a border in the Irish Sea. That was unconscionable.
That was the other.
Happened.
That was the other thing that came afterwards. But it just seems like there was just a blind spot about the whole process, and then you've got Michael Gove in there kind of steering a lot of this policy, and Michael Gove is well known for having absolutely opposed the Good Friday Agreement. He felt that it was appeasing terrorists. And he's said repeatedly that he thought that was a mistake. There was also the whole problem of being in bed with the DUP, who were pro-Brexit, very much against any closer cooperation with Ireland. And yeah, I think the UK government has just had a blind spot about Northern Ireland. I think ever since 1997, when the Good Friday Agreement was made, they've just kind of forgotten about Northern Ireland. It's just been, let them just go and do their weird Irish things.
And we'll not worry about it.
We'll not worry about it. I mean, it's one of those things. How often do you ever hear Northern Irish news on the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news? Or
very rarely we just don't hear about it. It's parochial as far as they.
I mean, it's even worse than Scotland and Wales. Scotland gets the most coverage because the SNP make the most noise. Wales gets some, and then Northern Ireland is forgotten. I think it all just speaks to how centralising, how London focused this government is, and successive governments. I mean, it's not just Boris Johnson. I think he's just the pinnacle of English nationalism.
Well, it's also been said that of the 4 nations or areas that make up the United Kingdom, Scotland is the only one in the entire Brexit saga which did not get what it voted for.
Yeah.
In Northern Ireland, they wanted to stay in the EU. They've got that wish now. Wales voted for Brexit. They've got Brexit. England voted for Brexit. They've got Brexit. Scotland voted against Brexit, and it seems to have just been shunted to the side.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that. I mean, I don't think that the UK government had any great desire for Northern Ireland to get a special deal. I don't think that was what they wanted. I think that's what they realised they had to do to avoid trampling all over the Good Friday Agreement and potentially, starting a war.
And also, I suppose, rubbishing all of their dreams of having a great trade deal with the United States.
But with Scotland, I think there's almost been an element of trolling about it. I think there's an element of, well, the SNP say one thing, so we have to do the opposite. I think the reaction to everything that the Scottish government has said throughout this, even when it's been joined by the Welsh government and the Northern Irish government, has been, well, if the SNP says it, it must be ignored. And that is not a good way to build unity and, take Britain forward as a united country. There has been no effort to work with the devolved governments. And you know, when you even hear members of the Welsh government saying, you know, independence kind of looks attractive now. That, you know, and that's coming from Welsh Labour. Then I think the UK government really ought to have woken up to it. But the fact that they haven't, and the fact that they're imposing this internal market bill without legislative consent from any of the devolved nations, I think tells you what their intentions are.
Well, talking about the borders between the four nations of the UK, if you want to call them nations. I mean, Northern Ireland is not a nation, obviously, it's a province. Yeah. But we then found later in September that the British government was imposing a border in Kent, into which truck drivers would not be permitted to travel unless they had the correct paperwork. Yeah. So essentially, the British government has moved its border inshore from Dover or Folkestone to somewhere in the borders of Kent. Yeah. And this was absolutely incredible. I think nobody could quite believe this when you had to have a passport to cross, you know, from Essex into Kent. Yeah, it's all a wee truck.
It's all a wee bit passport to Pimlico, isn't it?
It is indeed.
It's bizarre, yeah. But I think it just speaks to the lack of thought that went into Brexit. I think the campaign was fought on a slogan, take back control. That was all that it was. And there was never any thought given to what that really meant. There was never any thought, as we've said, not any thought really given to how it was going to affect Ireland, and very little thought given to how it was going to affect Dover. We heard, was it Matt Hancock or was it Grant Shapps? I can't remember.
Probably Grant Shapps.
That said, you know, I didn't realise how important the crossing of Dover was.
Yes. You know, I didn't realise that all of our imports and exports came across the channel.
Which seems just an extraordinary thing to say.
Mate.
Oh, sorry, it was Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab.
I remember now.
Thank goodness we've got somebody in our ear to keep us right on these things. But yeah, it's extraordinary how little thought has been given to these things. And now, you know, into December, and we still didn't have the software for the new customs arrangements tested. I mean,
has any of the software created by the UK government ever worked? Though it seems that even the track and trace system didn't work.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other story.
Now, quietly,
but yeah, it's baffling, and I think it just goes to show how much this government has been built on slogans, not substance. They wanted to take back control, and in actual fact, they've surrendered a ton of control over a lot of things. They wanted to unite Britain, and they've actually pushed the nations of Britain further apart. They didn't know what they really wanted. They didn't understand what they were doing, and I think they sold the British people a pup.
You think also, Kenny, when they said they wanted to take back control, they didn't say that they also wanted to take back control of Scotland. Well, that was hidden somewhere in the small print of Brexit.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of control seized that was never mentioned in the campaign, and then a lot of control given up that's been quietly hidden behind Boris's triumphant deal.
Well, moving into October, we were told about the Conservative government's plans to deal with asylum seekers offshore, if you remember this, that there were plans to have some kind of holding area on an island offshore from the United Kingdom. A little bit like the Australians do with migrants coming into Australia. They dump them somewhere on an island and keep them there until their asylum papers.
I mean, of all the asylum systems in the world to emulate, I think it's very telling that Australia is where the UK has looked, because Australia has one of the most punitive asylum systems in the world, certainly of kind of developed nations. It's punishing. It is downright cruel. And I think this idea of kind of essentially using prison ships which was one of the ideas that was touted.
Floating asylum prisons.
Potentially taking over one of the Western Isles and using that as a processing centre, which I know, virtually everybody that lives in the Hebrides was saying, to hell with that.
Concentration camp on our island.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, the idea got dropped pretty quickly once they saw public reaction to it. And I'm glad, actually, that public reaction was so strongly against it. But these kind of things have been mentioned before. The rhetoric against asylum seekers has continued to ramp up throughout this whole process. I mean, we saw the Navy out, trying to fight off people in dinghies.
I think Nigel Farage was down on the beach as
Nigel
Farage,
heavies. Without anything better to do with his life.
Vigilantism on the beaches of Kent.
It's madness. But I think it just speaks to what Priti Patel and generally the Tory party, as a rule, often with help from the Labour Party, has been pushing this anti-asylum seeker, anti-refugee rhetoric for a long, long time. And I think we are very lucky that the Scottish Government has been so much more willing to stand against that. I think we're very lucky to have a government that's willing to say, this isn't acceptable. We saw, for example, the franchise bill this year, I can't even remember when that was, but allowing refugees to vote in Scotland, which I think is a hugely positive move, and even just as a symbolic move to say, no, once you've got your refugee status, once you're legally in this country, you have all the rights that anyone else has.
You're a citizen here.
I think that's vitally important, and I think it's particularly important when we see the rhetoric and the actions of the Home Office and Priti Patel in particular become so viciously anti-immigrant.
We also heard from the Sinn Féin leader on the vote, on a call for a vote for Irish reunification in October. Now, the Sinn Féin have obviously been keen on this for decades. It's their reason for existing. But we also know that the situation in Northern Ireland is such that they are allowed to have a border poll, as they call it, basically, I suppose, an independence referendum in our terminology, every 7 years.
Yeah.
And yet that's not allowed in Scotland.
I mean, strictly speaking, we should say it's to be called when it looks likely that people will vote for reunification.
Yes, but it's not under the control of the people of Northern Ireland, is it?
Yeah, it's the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland who has that responsibility. But for example, if there were that same proposal in front of or if there were that same regulation written about Scotland, then there would be a referendum called this year, or rather next year, which would be 7 years after the last one, and it looks likely that the Scottish people would vote for it. And yet, there seems little chance of the UK government readily agreeing to it.
So basically, Northern Ireland gets to stay in the European Union de facto. Mm-hmm. It has a border between Ireland and mainland UK, and it's allowed to have an independence referendum every 7 years. Mm-hmm. Because the British government doesn't see that as a big problem. Why is Scotland such a prize to the British government? They're continually telling Scotland that we're too poor, too small, not good enough to stand by ourselves, and yet they desperately want to hang on to Scotland. What is going on there?
I mean, obviously, the Good Friday Agreement was essentially a ceasefire. It was a peace agreement. And I think it sends a very bad signal that this can be agreed in order to end a civil war, which is effectively what the Troubles were. But Scotland's independence movement, which has been scrupulously peaceful throughout its entire history, there has been almost no violence ever from anyone on the pro-independence side of the argument in Scotland. And therefore, we get less opportunities from the British government. I think I'm not trying to say that that Scotland should take up arms, and I'm certainly not saying that. I'm certainly not saying that Northern Ireland should somehow be punished for having had this turbulent past. But it does, I think, it does stick in your craw a wee bit that Scotland, which, as I say, has been scrupulously peaceful, scrupulously democratic throughout the entire history of the independence movement,
and terribly cooperative politically,
doesn't get the same opportunities.
Well, Kenny, let's bring it closer to the now, and moving forward towards November, and the U.S. election. The U.S. election result finally came in, albeit it took ages, and it was like drawing teeth, wasn't it? It just seemed to take forever. Mm-hmm. And that really turned Brexit on its head a bit, didn't it? Because it altered the whole international political landscape. The Conservative Party was, I think, expecting, perhaps not expecting is the right word, but we're hoping that Mr. Trump would get a second term and that there would be a glorious new trade deal with the United States under the Republicans. This must really have put a stick through the spokes of the Brexit bicycle.
It certainly didn't help them. They really did want that Trump trade deal. And Trump, I think, would have been willing to do something because he thinks Brexit is a good idea. He doesn't like the EU. He doesn't like this alternative power base that challenges America's position as the preeminent power of the world. I think though it was always naive, to be honest, because Trump doesn't believe in win-win situations. Trump believes in putting America first and everyone else has to come second.
He's very much a sort of isolationist, doesn't he?
If America wins from a trade deal, it means that someone else has to lose. He doesn't see win-wins on trade deals, on anything, really. So I don't think it was ever going to be as positive as people suggested. Joe Biden certainly, I think, is going to be more sympathetic to just normalization of relationships in the world, which will benefit us. It might not obviously benefit the political project of the Tories, but I think Joe Biden, for all I have some criticisms of him, I think he will normalize the world a bit more. I think there will be more sense given to, people not breaking international law. I think Joe Biden is the kind of person who will say, no, actually, that's not okay, and we're going to step in. We are going to be the world's policeman a wee bit, and we are going to have some sort of rules-based order. As for the election itself, I mean, it was exactly what we predicted. We got this red mirage where all the votes counted on the day were predominantly Republican because they'd been told not to vote by post. The Democrats, on the other hand, had done this massive exercise of getting out the postal vote. And so once the votes were counted, the Democrats won, or rather Biden won quite convincingly. It just astonishes me, though, every time there's an American presidential election, how long it takes to count the votes.
Because it's 50 states, isn't it? It's like 50 elections happening simultaneously.
Well, there is that, but they're counted on a county-by-county basis. Mm-hmm. I mean, and a lot of the counties are much smaller than any of our constituencies. Some are much bigger. Like Los Angeles County, for example, has a population like twice the size of Scotland. But yeah, it does surprise me that it takes them so long to count their votes. And I think possibly by the next presidential election, they will have looked into ways to count them faster so that they can avoid the kind of crisis that they had this time. Trump obviously did lose. There's no question about that, despite what he continues to say. But I think there was always that risk that it was going to look bad, that he was in the lead, and then as more and more votes got counted over the following days, it got eaten away. Then Biden did win by quite a margin. It was one of the most convincing Democratic wins in history, one of the biggest turnouts in history, and those things should be things that we celebrate. But because of the way that the votes were counted, it's left this bitter taste in some Trump supporters' mouths, and I don't know how long it's going to take for that bitter taste to go away. That's what I worry about.
Well, of course, there was also good news with regards to COVID in November, with the Pfizer vaccine being proved to be more than 90% effective, and later on, the Moderna vaccine, which is now, I think, being used in the United States, 94% effective. How much of a lift do you think that gave the population, just to know that these vaccines worked, that it wasn't going to be, a roll of the dice to take the vaccines?
Yeah, I think it's positive. There can't be any negative in having vaccines that work for this disease. I think it's unfortunate that we have had this kind of anti-vaxxer movement over the last however many years. It's difficult that we have just so little trust in our institutions, that there are so many people who can still question this kind of science. I do wonder as well if maybe the introduction of the vaccines at the start of December did encourage people to just take their foot off the gas a wee bit, to just be a wee bit more relaxed about how they interacted, how they obeyed the restrictions. But the most important thing that I think we should take from the fact that we have seen these vaccines developed is that things can get done when there's political will to do them.
Of course.
Vaccines, disease treatments, these things can get done when governments say, we need this done.
Of course, the Oxford vaccine today has been announced now as having gained approval in the United Kingdom. And of course, this vaccine is vastly cheaper than both its rivals. It's only £3 a dose, and it can be stored in a normal refrigerator. Surely that is going to be a game changer in the UK, because they've already bought millions of doses of this vaccine, and they've been stockpiled already. Yeah,
I certainly hope so. And I mean, for all the nonsense about leaving the EU was the reason why we could get the Pfizer vaccine first, which isn't true. That it was under an EU regulation of kind of emergency use. It is a huge positive. And as you say, with the other vaccine, the one developed in Oxford by AstraZeneca, I think that is immensely positive. It can be rolled out in the same way that the flu vaccine can. And the flu vaccine, there is a well-established protocol about who gets it, how it's delivered. It's done through ordinary GP surgeries, and it can be done in relatively rapid order.
It's a well-established procedure, isn't it?
Every GP has a list. I mean, I get the flu vaccine, so I know. I get a letter usually around about October saying you're due for a vaccine. Give us a call, make an appointment. If we have enough doses, then all the GPs need to do is go, right, who's at the top of the priority list, let's get them in this week. Who's next, let's get them in the following week. And with a bit of luck and a bit of careful organisation, if we have, obviously, enough vaccines available, that could all be rolled out in a matter of weeks, maybe a couple of months. And that would be just a huge, huge positive for everyone.
Okay, well, that brings us up towards December, but just before we leave the November period, there were two major announcements made. I was going to say announcements, but Boris Johnson actually made a rash statement where he said he felt that devolution was a mistake. And then Anna Sarwar came forward and said that he said there should be no Indie Ref till 2026. And of course, we've now had Labour leader Keir Starmer saying that he doesn't support independence referendums either. It looks as though the British parties are basically lining up to say no to Scotland. Again.
Absolutely. I think Boris Johnson, he claimed that this was, a misunderstanding, that it was just that he didn't like the SNP. But certainly for the Conservatives, the devolution hasn't been a success anywhere. They've got no power in Scotland. It did briefly give them a wee bump when they had Ruth Davidson kind of grabbed some attention by being whatever Ruth Davidson is. I'm not exactly sure why she's so attractive to some voters. Yes. Oh, yeah, Baroness Davidson, as she will be very soon. But yeah, I don't think devolution has been good for the Tories. It has shown how in Wales, Northern Ireland, and in Scotland, all three governments have tried to do different things. They've all pursued what suited them, what suited their countries. And particularly during the COVID crisis, we've seen the devolved governments maintain a high level of trust with their people.
And of course,
and Johnson has lost trust because he has looked like he hasn't known what he's doing. It's been great for the profile, obviously, of Nicola Sturgeon. Her daily briefings have been one of the things that have kept Scotland kind of much better at sticking to the regulations, much more trusting of the scientific advice. The same is true to a slightly lesser extent in Wales and in Northern Ireland. I think what's most interesting there is that because it's a power-sharing executive, you had people who might naturally be Sinn Féin supporters, people who were naturally nationalists, kind of saying, we have to do what Ireland's doing. And the DUP, the Unionists, kind of saying, we have to do exactly what Britain's doing. And in actual fact, the two of them sat down together and said, no, we have to do what works for Northern Ireland. And that has been perhaps the most important thing that we've learned during COVID is just how much devolution matters. Public health is a devolved matter, and it's been clear just how much of a difference devolved government makes. I think Boris Johnson is wrong. Devolution hasn't been a disaster. Devolution has been, by and large, a positive. More local government is always a positive virtually everywhere in the world. When you bring power closer to the people, you get better results.
Well, that just sorry, Kenny, I was just going to say that.
As for you also mentioned Anas Sarwar, and I should just say Anas Sarwar is going to have nothing to do with any decision over a referendum, ever, because the next time Labour are in power will be after Scotland is independent.
Fair enough. Okay, well, that just brings us right up to date. And of course, now we have the Internal Markets Bill has been passed without the Lord's amendments. So we now know that is happening. The Brexit deal has been signed in the nick of time, it seems, and it's a very thin deal. Nicola Sturgeon is probably the most popular leader in the UK, if not in Europe at the moment, and it's reflected in continuing polls. 17 polls putting the SNP, probably putting independence as being the settled will of the Scottish people. How confident do you feel, Kenny, that we're going to achieve independence next year? Is it going to happen in your view?
Well, I was convinced in 2014. I know I'm kind of in a minority here, but I was convinced in 2014 that Scotland would vote for independence. I found it very hard to imagine people going into the ballot box and voting against their own country. That did surprise me. Even I never really trusted the polls. I thought people, once they were actually in the ballot box, would find it very hard to say no. So I was slightly surprised by the result in 2014. I know a lot of people say, well, it was always obvious it was never going to happen. Obviously now support is much higher.
Approaching 60%.
Yeah.
People say.
The question obviously is how hard that support is. There are still plenty of things that could go wrong. So I certainly think it would be a mistake to count chickens before they're hatched. The First Minister obviously has been a big part of it. She's been very visible throughout the crisis, and as I said, Boris Johnson has made the UK look just disastrous.
He appears to have spent a lot of time hiding when big things were happening.
Yeah, and when he has appeared, he's been unclear. He's been kind of trying to make triumphs out of nothing. I think he's less good at detail. He really doesn't stay on top of his briefs. You hear him at Prime Minister's questions. He really doesn't know how to answer questions very well. He doesn't like being challenged. So there's certainly that difference, I think, has been highlighted. The public health infrastructure, as I said, being separate in Scotland, and Boris Johnson effectively during the crisis just being the Prime Minister of England. I think has shown just how important it is for Scotland to be able to make its own decisions. Scotland's performance during the pandemic hasn't been massively better than the UK's, but it has been better. And where it's been difficult for the Scottish Government, it's largely been because of interactions with the UK government on the finances, on closing borders, the political difficulty, for example, of closing the border with England. So that's one factor. Obviously, Brexit is the other big factor. You mentioned, as we said, we've got this deal now. It's not going to be good for Scotland. None of this has been good for Scotland. It's already hurt, all kinds of people in Scotland, manufacturers, farmers, fishermen. It's already doing damage and has been for the last 4.5 years. So I think some of that will certainly carry over. If the pandemic is gone, by the time it comes to May, then perhaps people might have kind of forgotten a little bit. I mean, voters' memories tend to be very, very short. There's also the possibility that kind of COVID fatigue sets in, and people go, people just say, I'm sick of politicians, period, and can't bear the thought of another election, then another referendum. We have had a lot of politics over the last, really since 2014. We've had an election virtually every year, sometimes two elections a year.
I was going to say, actually, when you mentioned elections and voter fatigue, there are calls from now quite senior members of the SNP and some other parties for a plebiscite election to happen next year. Would you think that's a possibility?
It certainly doesn't seem to be something that the SNP is looking seriously at. I can see the argument for it.
Get it done quicker without all the fatigue setting in, and
I think there are risks. Obviously, you take a parliamentary election and turn it into a single issue campaign. There are risks to that, but I can certainly see how it could be used at the very least to put a huge amount more political pressure on the UK government to agree a referendum. If people have been told this is a vote for independence and they voted in majority for it, it becomes a lot harder then to say, well, people don't want a referendum, people don't want independence, we're not going to allow it. It would be a strong political weapon. It doesn't seem to be what the SNP are looking at, though.
Because
so I think
much harder for UK parties to avoid taking part in an election.
There's that as well. Yeah, it's very hard for them to boycott it. There is no way to make it to declare it unlawful the way that they're likely to do.
And a plebiscite election would be advisory only. It could not be anything
so would
else.
A referendum technically. So that's one of these questions. But these things are all decided way above our pay grade, Gordon. So,
well, listen, Kenny, it's always been a pleasure to talk to you, Kenny. We should spend more time in the studio together.
We should.
Anyway, it's time to wind up the programme and to remind people that we still have an ongoing campaign to raise funds. Kenny, I think since I have you in the studio, I should give you the last word.
Sure. Fair enough.
On this here.
Well, it has been a big year for Broadcasting Scotland. We have been doing difficult things, keeping shows going, bringing guests in remotely. We like to think that we've covered the news very well. We have given a lot of coverage to a lot of stories. We had a list a mile long of things we could have talked about today, and we couldn't possibly touch on them all, or we would have been here all day. But I like to think that Broadcasting Scotland has done a power of work this year, and that's why we are asking now for your support. As you know, we have been running a crowdfunder, which you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate if you'd like to make a one-off donation. If you'd like to sign up as a regular supporter, you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there. So we would love you to support us if you can. If you can't support us financially, we do understand. It has been a very difficult year for everybody financially, so we do understand that. The shows will always be free to view online. But you can still support us by going to following our Twitter at Broadcast Scot, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, finding us on the Amazon Fire Stick, and sharing us around with your family and friends. Let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. Next year is going to be a big year politically. We mentioned the election. There is obviously the possibility of a referendum as well, and that's going to take a lot to cover. We want to raise that money from our crowdfunder to employ some staff, but we also need some volunteers as well. So if you'd like to get involved in any way in producing programmes here at Broadcasting Scotland, please do get in touch with us wherever you are in Scotland. We are based in Glasgow, so if you want to get into the studio, you'd have to be local. If you're not, then you can help us out from remote areas in all sorts of other ways. So do please get in touch with us there. But that is absolutely all we have for you this year. Thank you once again for joining us throughout the year and especially this evening. Thank you to Gordon. Thank you to all of our guests that we've had throughout the year. Thank you especially to Linda, who is the person you never see here at Broadcasting Scotland, but who is the person who makes everything happen. She works tirelessly to make things happen, and we owe her a huge debt of gratitude.
Hear, hear.
But that is all we've got for you. So a good New Year to you when it comes, and we will leave you with the First Minister's New Year's message to the country. Thanks once again for joining us, and we will see you in 2021.
Happy New Year.
This Hogmanay, as we look forward to a new year, most of us will be relieved to be ringing out the old one. 2020 has been unimaginably difficult. Thousands have lost loved ones. Our society has been upended, our economy has taken a severe hit. Many have lost jobs, families have had to cancel holidays, and of course Christmas plans had to be cancelled too. We've had to deny ourselves so many of the things that we most value in life: human companionship, hugs from loved ones, the comfort and the pleasure we get from meeting and spending time with each other. I can simply never thank all of you enough for the sacrifices you have made and the patience you have shown during these last difficult months. One of the continuing consolations of this year has been seeing how often the worst of times have brought out the very best in people. Our health and care workers in particular have shown the most extraordinary dedication in the most testing of circumstances. The entire country is grateful for your efforts. But there are so many other examples too. When we asked for volunteers to help people in their local communities, more than 40,000 people signed up in the first 48 hours alone. Thousands of others signed up for vaccine trials or helped to track COVID symptoms. And many more of you supported charities and local businesses, or helped in your local communities, or kept in touch with neighbours and friends who otherwise would have been lonely. These have all been points of brightness in dark times. They have reminded us again of what truly matters in life: kindness, compassion, solidarity and love. As we look forward to 2021, for all the difficulties that still lie ahead, there is a lot we can now look forward to. Tens of thousands of people in Scotland have now received their first vaccination against COVID, and that number will grow in the weeks and months ahead. 2021 will also see the expansion of free nursery care, the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment to tackle child poverty, and the first full year of Scotland's new investment bank. As we rebuild after this pandemic, we must focus on making Scotland a fairer country and a greener country. And of course, towards the end of the year, the eyes of the world will be on Glasgow and the COP26 Climate Change Summit, a gathering that has the potential to set the whole world on a path to a more sustainable future. So even as we reflect on this darkest of years, we can see light ahead. Of course, our first priority must be to get through these next few weeks and months. They will be tough for all of us. So let's stick with it and stick together. Let's continue to show each other kindness, compassion and love. And let's all of us resolve to make 2021 Scotland's year of recovery. I wish all of you a happy new year.
the Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.